Hello, this is Oz, the Culture Warrior here. Culture Warrior podcast. Today, we're going to get a little bit more into the origins of culture and racism. But you got to go to culture before you get to racism. Racism is just a system of culture. So I'm gonna try to get into more detail of that. The point being here is that you can't understand how to reach your destination if you don't know the source of origin, right? And you can't fix a problem until you correctly identify the problem. And so racism is a symptom. Racism and all those isms are symptoms. It's not the actual problem. But for over 100 years, since W.E.B. Du Bois declared that the problem of the 20th century was racism, we still haven't made any significant progress. I mean, of course, we got a few just civil liberties, but racism is still alive and well, and that's because we're addressing the symptom, not the problem. So I'm going to get into this, and I'm going to start my podcast like I always do by reading the Circumference of Awareness. And Circumference of Awareness states that the space inside this circle represents my realm of knowledge. All that I think I know about whatever I think I know is depicted right here in this circle. I must keep in mind that there's more to know than what is within the circumference of my awareness. I think that's a good rule to live by. I think that's a lot of the problem today. So, like I said, in order for us to understand where we're going or how to reach a destination or achieve a goal, we got to know our starting point. We got to know our origin. It's like with your GPS. You turn your GPS on, the first thing is you want to know before you put in where you're going is ask for your location. It wants to know where are you, because it can't get you a good mapping to achieve or to reach your destination if it don't know where you are. And that's the truth. That's how you solve any problem. You got to have a source of origin, or you have to, in other words, I'm an IT, been in IT for a long time, right? And before I was in IT, I was in ET, I was electronic technician. And one of the first rules of troubleshooting is correctly identify the symptom. Once you recognize what the symptom is, then, okay, that's a symptom is this. But before you can make that determination, you have to know how the thing was supposed to, how it worked originally. It's when it was in good working order, right? So if you know how it's supposed to work, that way when you see a symptom, oh wait, that's not right. What is causing, then you start troubleshooting the symptom. So same thing with social problems. You know what I'm saying? You got to get to the origin, and we have to pivot away from race and racism, because really and truly, the establishment, the ruling class, who use all those isms as tools to divide us, they pivot off of that 50 years ago. They pivoted off of race 50 years ago with the Southern strategy, right? So they don't use racial terms anymore. He said, nigga, nigga, nigga ain't gonna work for you no more. So they start using abstract things to imply, they call it dog whistling now, but that's what he was doing, right? And so while it hasn't gone anywhere, they don't focus on race, right? They don't focus on, what they do is use these abstract ideas and concepts, right? To mean the same thing to their followers, right? But they don't deal in that because they know it's divisive. And when they do that, that's just like, okay, that's the sign, yeah, I'm talking to you, right? It is subliminal, right? And our response is always emotional. It's always reactive, you know, and we never focus and concentrate that negative energy in a positive direction. And so what I hope and what I'm trying to do is provide the knowledge and information so that we don't keep repeating this cycle. It's worse than it's ever been, but if we don't change our tactics, if we don't come up with a strategy and a plan, it's not going to change. And I have a strategy and a plan, you know? So I'm going to try to lay it out for you. I'm going to start with, but first, you know, you gotta do your homework first. You gotta lay out the theory and the concepts from what I'm working from, and then you can put it all together, right? Because if I start talking about things like the doctrine of discovery and, you know, the doctrine of unequals, you know, unequal exchange, you're gonna be like, what? So I'm gonna go back there and go over the origin, but I'm gonna show you how important it is when we talk about origin, how important that is. There was a brother, heavy brother. I didn't find out about him until about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. He had long since been dead. His name is Lesterville Middleton. He was a Pan-Africanist and a TV producer. He was an author and a poet. And he wrote a poem called The Origin of Things. And, you know, being a Pan-African, that said enough about it. So I'm going to play that poem, Origin of Things, for you, and it's going to shed some light on some things for you, right? Because when you don't know where you're from, or you don't know your point of origin, you're kind of lost, and you can be kind of led any kind of way. So let's talk about the origin of things. So let me find that, and let me pull that up. Give me a second here. Okay, here it is. The origin of things. It's a pretty deep poem.
Look around you, Black child. Your creation is everywhere. Though painted, distorted, given new names, they bear your prints just the same. So sharpen your eyes, tune your ear, so you know what you see. understand what you hear. You were the first to write, the first to read. Humanity sprang from your black seed. For 110,000 years, you were here alone. And then the Caucasian man was born. Behind the ice, inside the cold, a chill set in this new man's soul. Other minds have been credited with the things they learned from you. Newton, Pythagoras, Kepler, and Galileo too. Sharpen your eyes, tune your ear, so you'll know what you see, understand what you hear. You made the serpent the symbol of the healing arts, and African justice was goddess Mat, who weighed herself against the African soul, truth and justice blindfold. The George Washington Monument is yours too, a copy of the African Tekenu, the symbol of the black world's powers of creation, the black man's penis in divine procreation. The king of southern Egypt wore the white crown. Keep listening and you catch your mouth when you learn that the central government in Egypt was known as the White House. Sharpen your eyes, tune your ear, so you'll know what you see, understand what you hear. Your god Osiris was restored to life long before Buddha, long before Christ. And today, what you call the Madonna and Child is but the first black family worshiped along the Nile. And when you feel the Spirit, the Holy Ghost, you should know it started at Abydos, where God Osiris's body was laid, the Holy Land, where Africans prayed. Minute by minute, hour by hour, as you lose your history, you lose your power. So sharpen your eyes, tune your ear, so you know what you see, understand what you hear.
That was Lester Philip Middleton, The Origin of Things. And that is a really profound piece of work, because it points out a lot of the things that I know I didn't know most of it, and I'm sure most people don't know most of it. You know, we have been long, and this is a part of culture, right? Your belief and value system, right? We'll get into that in a minute. But your belief and value system is what is programming. It's how we are programmed. You know, it don't have anything to do with your education and intelligence, because it start programming you right out of the womb. You know, it's less prevalent now, but back in the day, you know, as soon as you came out, they was trying to get you Christian or baptized. That's programming, you know, program from the cradle to the grave. So like the Tekenu, that's the Washington Monument. People think the Washington Monument was a European invention. They're all over Africa. The blind justice, that's Mayat. That's the goddess Mayat. And as a matter of fact, the goddess Mayat, a lot of the Ten Commandments are exactly what the laws of Mayata. She has about 46 of them. And actually the 10 Commandments were not just 10 Commandments, but there were some 613 cardinal ordinances and laws and judgments. And you got to understand that that was the beginning of principles, setting up a principle, values for mankind, right? And so when he talks about these things about spirituality, is what he's talking about. He was saying that this was long before Jesus Christ. And one of the arguments that a lot of anti-religious, and I'm not anti-religious, but I'm not a Christian either, far from it. But a lot of people, one of the critiques they do as well. Yeah, there's several civilizations that talked about a virgin birth, and a lot of the things that we all associate with Jesus Christ. And they use that to say that, you see, everybody, so it can't be true. Well, the reality is, if you look at it from a different perspective, if you had a creator and he was all knowing and all powerful and omnipotent, he can make you see whatever he wants, whatever way he can come to you in a way that you can understand and make you see it, right? So that doesn't invalidate it, that validates it, right? Because what it shows, we don't have a racist or prejudiced God. You see, everybody wants to make God theirs, but God is he the creator. And I don't like to use the word God, because God is anything that could be praised or worshiped. All right, but there's a creator. And the easiest way to prove that there's a creator is because you are here. You are creation. Right? So what he's talking about in the origin thing, see, like, do you know there are many photos, paintings of the Madonna and Child that are Black? Many of them, and they're in Europe, so they know. You know what I'm saying? Do you realize that European culture did not create monotheism? But now they're the head of the most corrupt organization. We're going to go through that, corrupt religious organization. They're the head of it, right? Catholic Church. And I don't have no feelings about the Catholic Church or Jews, anything. These are facts. Facts is the fact. You know what I'm saying? So it's important for us to understand the origin of civilization, of culture, because basically get the names right, Yahweh is the name of the God of the Jews, of the Hebrews, all right? And what Yahweh was doing back there, he was creating a culture. He laid out rules and laws and principles that they had to follow, right? And then he set that up, right, for all those rules and laws he created. He knew that man couldn't keep them, right? So what he did was he came down himself and he kept them. He fulfilled the law and the prophecy. Look in the scripture. That's what Jesus used, the right name, Yahshua. And we talk about these lynchings, right? That was really, one of the first lynchings. He wasn't the first, but because the Romans had been doing crucifixion for long before he was on the scene. But he was a person of color. So, you want to say his name, say his name. If I would say, if the brother who was killed this past 2 weeks ago, now why am I drawing a blank on this man's name? Is everywhere. But if I used a different name for him, y'all be like, that's not his name. Say his name. So why you gonna call Jesus Yahshua Jesus? Not the same thing. That's where you start off wrong, you end up wrong. And I'm going somewhere with this because this culture and our culture is based on these beliefs, these value systems, the corrupt value systems. And the one thing about the Christian church, or the Catholic Church, which is the mother of all Christianity, because all of them branched off from there, right? Is that started off wrong. And of all the religions, the major three religions, and they came, they came from Judaism, right? Or Yahudism was the correct term. There was no letter J in that day, right? In the Greek, Latin, Hebrew language. So it couldn't have been Jews, right? It was Yahudas, right? Y the I was derived from letter I, so forth, so on. All right, so if you start out wrong, you end up wrong, right? And we talk all the time, you hear people supposedly, Christian or saved people talk about there are all these things with powers in the name, right? And you do this in his name, you baptize in his name, everything in the name, but then you won't say his name, right? That's a problem. You start off wrong, you end up wrong, right? So I'm just pointing those things out. You got to understand, we got to go back to the origin, right? And that's not really the origin. That's the origin of the current prevailing dominant culture. Their values and belief came from a corruption of what Yahweh gave to the Yahudas, right? The Jews, right? And of the three religions, and this, they're the one who still, the Jews in Islam, or the Muslims, they follow that, at least most of them try to follow those principles laid out by their prophet, right? So that's, they say Jesus was just a good prophet and Muhammad is a prophet, right? And the Jews, some of the Jews, the Pharisees believed in the resurrection and the Sadducees didn't, all right? So a lot of Jews didn't believe it. There's still something like you have Jews for Christ. That's those who believed in the resurrection, all right? But both of them followed the principles laid out in their holy book. Christianity, they the first thing they got wrong was that they said, don't serve any other gods before me, right? Before we get to that, let's go to number 4. Don't worship any graven images. That's how we really got off track, at least how they got off track, right? The Europeans, right? But they was off track from the jump when they got the name wrong, right? Then they created a graven image and everybody worshiped. The most prominent one that's remembered is from, I think, the 16th century, where 16 chapels were created, right? And they got this painting. That's the first graven image where they made a distinction that the creator in Adam was of European descent, was European. Now that was 1600 years later after the fact, right? So I'm showing you a pattern here. It is like when you make it's like doing a trajectory problem, right? Like the smaller the area is, the longer, the further out you get, the bigger and bigger the area becomes, right? And so that's what's happening. That's where we're at right now, right? And so in order for us we got to go back to the beginning of the era. We can't catch it in the middle because you didn't get the era from the beginning, right? So that's why I'm starting this way. So the first commandment said, look, don't put any God before myself. And what in the layman interprets, all right, and God wasn't the word they used, right? It was a Hebrew word, probably Eloah, Elohim, right? Before me, right? But the English translated that into God, right? And that's why I say I don't believe in God, because God is anything that you deem worthy of worship, of praise, And what do Western culture worship and pray, worship more than anything? Money. Money. So they was wrong right off the bat with that, right? Because what did Joshua get mad about? The tax collectors, money, right? And see, the Bible is a very valuable source of information. See, all information is good. It all depends on what you do with it, you know? The Bible is just a book, right? Nothing special about it except for what's in it and your interpretation and understanding of it, right? But the Bible pointed those things out early. Hey, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? And that's basically what that first commandment is telling you. Do not put any gods before me. Substitute money for that. So, like I say, they just get down further and further down the slippery slope, right? Then they got the name wrong, right? Instead of using his name, Joshua, because if you use Joshua, it'll make more sense. It's another thing the critics don't get. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, you know, how did they get Jesus out of I-N-R-I? If they put that inscription above his head on the cross. It's supposed to be Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, right? But they translated the R, Rex, which is Greek for king, right? Nazareth was where it's from. And they even know then that you don't translate names, you transliterate names. So Nazareth was going to be Nazareth, whatever language it was in. But where the I's come from? I didn't come about until some 1,600 years later, right? In the first, after the publication of the first King James Bible, and after 1611, before 1611, it was I-E-S-U-S. So he said, I come in my Father's name. This is why this is important. And you believe me not. Let another come in his own name, him you will believe. Now, if his Father's name is Yahweh, right, which means the all-powerful, the all-knowing, right? And his name is Yahshua, Yah, part of his Father's name, Shua, salvation. That makes a whole lot more sense than Jesus, right? But the point I'm making, if you start off wrong, you end up wrong, right? And so one of the big things that you know, they say, another thing in the scripture is that the devil deceiveth the whole world. The whole world. And you got billions of people worshiping Jesus. You got billions of more people worshiping the dollar. Rich and poor. The rich trying to get it, the poor trying to get out more. And what do they say about, the other thing they say about the devil in the Bible? He's insatiable. And so those terms, words are important. Those terms are important. You know, I try not to talk about God when I'm talking about spiritual things because of what I told you. God is anything that could be worshiped, right? The more appropriate term, I think, is creator, right? Because how do you know that God exists? Because you exist. People always get caught up on where they're going after they die. Did you ever think about where you were before you died? You were in your mother and father. You had an existence before you took your first breath into the world. all right? But you're not gonna get this in Catholicism or Christianity or nowhere else. I got this from the 13 years I spent in the Institute of Divine Metaphysical Research. And I was thankful for that. Because one of the things that I was never plugged into the matrix. I was never plugged into the program. I didn't go to church when I was a child. My mom didn't go to church. She's a radio evangelist. She listened to the church on the radio and on the television. But she had a bad experience in church. That's why she stopped going. But she never stopped believing. So unlike most of us, I didn't get that original program. All right. So when I started, I had a curiosity, about God and all that things as a young kid. But I said, one day I'm gonna find out. And because I sought the knowledge, it was presented to me. So let's get back to this thing. Like I said, if you start off wrong, you end up wrong. So if you start off with Jesus, if you start off worshiping money, it just gonna get worse, right? And this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? And my point is, that's why you got to get off of race. It's bigger than race. Bigger than race. Race is a tool of the ruling class. It's another trick. It's another deception, to get you, to mislead you, to not look at the important thing. And the important thing is your principles, your values, your beliefs. Western culture has the time. We have a hegemonic culture. That culture is permeated the majority of the world, not all of it, right? But even the ones who don't follow it, follow certain aspects of it, like capitalism, all right? So let me get back on track here. So that's the origin of things. So this week, and it's funny, I hardly look at the news. I stopped looking at the news a long time ago when I was in the military, because I started noticing, the script was the same no matter where I lived. When I was in San Diego, I was getting the same news, as far about violence, crime in the Black neighborhood. And I grew up in Black neighborhoods, and about there was crime, but it wasn't as bad as the media presents it, And I started noticing a pattern, and that's important. That's the thing that distinguishes humans from animals, because we can recognize patterns, because we can think past, present, and future. Most animals live on instinct, with the exception of a few primates, right? But even primates don't have the cognitive capacity to think past, present, and future in patterns, to look and see a pattern, right? Most of them don't, not to a large degree. They might recognize simple things, but that's very few, all right? So I was saying that to say I don't watch a lot of news, except for like when you have, incidents like we got now, and I usually don't get most of my information from that. And it's sad today that the court jester back in the medieval times, the European medieval time, he was the entertainer. They didn't go to him for knowledge in the day, you know what I'm saying? But now our version of the court jesters, comedians, they have all the wisdom. I was just listening to a piece David Chappelle gave. Man, that dude is deep. But you know why? That's another thing, right? The reason why they took arts and entertainment and sports out of school, this is the ruling class, right? It's why they got you guys all caught up in the what they call these schools now, charter schools. That was just to get the culture take the culture away from the public, take it out of public purview and put it in the private purview. And that's tyrannical, you know, because when you're in a corporation, there is no democracy. You have a ruler. That's the problem with Trump. He's not used to dealing with anybody. He was the boss, and that's it. That's an extreme, a rare extreme case, but most of them not that far. They're just not as extreme as him. That's why they're privatizing everything, so that they can take the control out of the hands of the public, of the people. All right. So I was saying, I was looking at a lot of these talk shows and what have you, and they pose questions, and even online, I see these questions, you know, posed by protesters and reporters and commentators and late night talk show hosts and comedians, and all of them are basically wondering how we're going to get out of the quagmire that the world finds itself in regarding police brutality and political and economic corruption and race and all those other isms and biases and stereotypes and prejudices that are the foundation of the pervasive systemic inequality and injustice imposed on a society by the ruling class. And it can be summed up in one word: culture. Culture. Everybody's focusing on race, but nobody's focusing on culture. So if you trace the evolution of race, or what they say, the etymology of race, you start getting closer to the problem, right? So race was something that was created, invented by the European culture, right? So if you only focusing on race and not focusing on culture, which is what determines your beliefs and values of people, of society about race, you're not going to get to the problem. You're not going to solve the problem. Now you can choose your parents, and you can choose you can't choose your parents. You can't choose your parents. You can't choose your race. You can't choose your gender. Nowadays you can change it, but you can't choose it, right? The one thing that you can choose is what values, your principles, your beliefs, your worldview. You can change that. Everybody individually can change that, right? And you change that, you can change the world. But long as you're focusing on one aspect of culture, which is race, culture involves art, and, you know, recreation, all of those things are part of culture. You know what I'm saying? So we need to focus on culture, because that is the problem. W.E.B. Du Bois said the problem of the 20th century was the color line. 100 years later, we still fighting that same problem. So if we want to get this thing right, and we got to do it quick and in a hurry, we got to get off the color line. And all due respect to W.E.B. Du Bois, he just was working with the knowledge that he had at the time. He didn't have the privilege that I have to look back on the data for those years. Man, he wasn't that far removed from slavery, you know. So he didn't know about it, and they didn't have the knowledge. They didn't have the information that we have access to now. And this is the thing. This is why we can change this, because the information is out there. But the problem is that they have dumbed down America, and everybody follows America's lead, most of the Western world. They dumbed down America so much, you know, that we're not even curious We don't have the intellectual curiosity to find out things for ourselves. And that's what we're gonna really have to do. Now, when you talk about the revolution will not be televised, and I see some people saying, yeah, the revolution is televised. That's not what Gil Scott-Heron was talking about. He was talking about the revolution has to take place in your mind first. And that's the heavy lifting. Because it's easy to think and lead with your heart. That's how they get you. That's how they get you with religion and everything else, right? But mainly religion. Because they get you all worked up. And then, you know, the one thing that African Americans have, which is like our, you know, we like the Pied Piper. We have music. They took music and used it against us. We have the power of music. We create beautiful songs. At least we used to. I mean, there's still some today, but you know, they don't have the substance that a Marvin Gaye had. What's going on? You know what I'm saying? They didn't have they don't think in those terms today, right? Because after the 70s, you know, everybody bought into this thing about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, and it had unintended consequences of the civil rights era, second civil rights era, really, and accomplishments. And I'm not knocking the civil rights leaders of those at that time, because I hate to hear people always, you know, mocking those people who were there in the fight, in the struggle to get your behind what, you know, what liberties that we do have now, you know, and then just saying people, and the times change and people change. And I don't agree with all of what those leaders did then, what they are, where they are now, not everything. But I know I trust them more than a lot of these jokers coming up, because they've been in the fight, they've been in the struggle, you know. Times change, people change, you know. So let's get into this culture thing, because that's what I'm saying. It's about culture. So I'm gonna give you that definition, culture. And I love this, it's several definitions. And I use these, this is from Merriam-Webster, online, right? It's out there. You ain't got to use Merriam. The Cambridge say similar things, right? Or you could just look it up in Wikipedia. A lot of people don't trust Wikipedia sources, but it's all saying the same thing. And in my experience, most of the things I look at in Wikipedia, if I look somewhere else, it's got pretty much the same thing. So the culture is the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. See, that's what you got to think about. It's a group mentality, right? It's a group thing. It's not individualistic. No individual has a culture, right? That culture, that individual culture is provided when they arrive on the scene, right? The leadership that you fall under determine your culture right from birth. So meaning your values and belief system that you get from birth, that go determine your culture. Then when you go from your house to you start going to school, now you start developing even more social traits and as a result of peer pressure, right? And so forth and so on, right? So that's what's really important. That shapes who you are. I remember when I was in school and SIU, all campus program in Fairfield at the Air Force Base. We had this class, and we was watching this video by a guy named, I hope I get his name right. I always want to say Robert Massey, but I know it's not Robert, but it's well, I'll look it up and give it to you later. But Massey, he did this. He has a whole series of programs, of videos about what you are now is what you are when, right? Meaning what his theory was, your personality is pretty solidly formed between the ages of 9 and like 12, or the person of who you're gonna be, right? That's pretty much gonna determine who you are for the rest of your life, unless you have a significant emotional event, marriage, death, birth of a child. Those change people's perspective and values and ways that they look at life, right? But other than that, your values are pretty set by the time you're 9, 10, 11, 12, something like that, right? That's where your culture starts, right? Your belief in your value system. So the characteristic features of everyday existence, such as diversions, are a way of life shared by people in a place and time. The place is America, time is now. B, the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or an organization. Now, when you start talking about institutions and organizations, you have different degrees of culture. You have a microculture, right? Microcultures are like in your house, at your job, in your fraternity, in your city, right? That's getting larger and larger, right? And then when you start looking at regions, now you're looking at states and nations, right? And continents. That's macro cultures, right? So you have culture affecting our life from cradle to grave, from the time you're born until you die. And wherever you live at, that's the culture that you're gonna pretty much be a part of and affect you, whether you know it or not. And so you gotta realize, and this, I don't know if I told this story, I said it, I mentioned it, but when I was in the military, this is how I got involved in culture. When I was in the military, I was an instructor, and they were having a international incident, or about to, because we taught. I was in the Navy, and we taught foreign sailors. Right, I taught sailors from Japan, Germany, Australia, France, Pakistan, India, you name it. You know, we had those guys in our class. And so this was in the 80s, right? Late 80s. So, you know, I mean, only thing I knew about Muslims was the black Muslims. I never came in contact with many of them, except by bean pie or something. But I had these Muslim guys in our class from Pakistan. And so what was happening, they were having some hygiene issues, right? And what we found out was that, you know, according to, you know, a lot of their religious tradition, they listed guys who lived in barracks and they had open showers. They couldn't shower, bathe, right? And I don't know what was going on with the uniforms, but somehow, you know, the uniforms, you know, they wouldn't get clean. So they had, you know, and I don't, like, all I know is a problem. I didn't get that detailed into it, and somebody can correct me about that. That's not the point. But the problem, the issue was that it was an issue, you know, and it was an issue in my classroom because, you know, it just was hygiene issue, right? And so what the command did was that they found this program. It was a program sponsored by B'nai B'rith. That's what they called themselves at the time, but now it's the Anti-Defamation League. And they had The name of the program was A World of Difference, right? And it was managing culture in the classroom. And it was very eye-opening to me. I learned a lot about culture. And one of the biggest takeaways I learned was that, you have Western culture is based on individualism. Non-Western cultures are based on collectivism, meaning that they believe the greater good of the whole is more important than the greater good of the one, right? And that's contrary to what individualism is, at least what they portray it to be, right? Because in reality, they don't do anything individually themselves, right? There's always a cabal or some group in the background running and controlling things, right? But that's the difference. And that was eye-opening to me. I'm like, wow. And so we got through that. Long story short, we got through that. I learned a lot. I taught a lot of the young sailors a lot, And after it was all over, it dawned on me. It's like, how do we expect? I mean, this training is good, but how do we expect these young people to cut their culture switch off that they didn't had all their life, all their upbringing, especially the Americans, right? Their belief and value systems about people who are different. How you think they're gonna cut that switch off when they get in another environment? They can't. They bring that culture wherever they go. Their belief and value system travel with them. So in the workplace, in the clubs, in their unions, all of that stuff come with them. You kind of see where I'm going now? That's the problem. It's the cultures that they have, from the micro cultures to the macro cultures. And those things can be changed if you're willing to do the work. But that's gonna take work on both of our parts, right? And it goes on to say that corporate culture, give an example, corporate culture, that's another culture. There's another culture. Corporate culture focused on the bottom line. See, the set of values, conventions, or constructs is another word, right? Or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or a societal characteristic, right? Like racism. Those are social constructs, that's something that's gonna vary. That's something that a social construct is something that society agrees on, a majority people in a group believe on, and nobody challenges it, so they go with it. All right. Another example they give, like changing the culture of materialism will take time. All right, that came from Peggy O'Mara, whoever she is, I don't know. That's just an example that they use. All right. And then they say the integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, and behavior that depends upon the capacity for learning and transmitting knowledge, and here's the kicker, to succeeding generations. See, so when that culture started in Europe, and when it started in the 4th century AD, right, at the Council of Nicaea, right, when it came up with these religious fictions, like the Trinity. You don't find Trinity nowhere in the Bible, right? They make these things up, right? And the ruling class, and you got to remember, at that time, a lot of the script, first of all, people were ignorant for the most part, And, you know, a lot of that was written in Latin, you know. So they just had to take the people's word for it, you know. And so I'm gonna step back, you know, one of those other mistakes, one of those things that they started off wrong with was they took I hear him say all the time, you hear these commercials, yeah, we went wrong when they took God out of the church, you know. No, they went wrong when they took God out of the body. And they took God out of the body and put him in the sun, moon, and stars, and they put the devil underneath the earth, right? Instead of keeping where they both say they belong. You know, one of the scriptures talk about the devil, God convenes all his sons. And see, that's another thing they talk about, you know, that the devil is you know, like he's a self-made man. You know, no, the devil is a creation too, right? And when I use words like devil and God, I use it for your understanding, for the people's understanding. Because what I really understand is that you can take, it's the evil, or devil, right? That besets man, right? When the Creator destroyed the world with a flood, he said it was because his thoughts and intents was evil continuously. Not the man, not his body was evil continuously. It was his thoughts and his intents. That's spirit, y'all. All right. So that's what really talking about. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about spiritual things, you know, and we keep focusing on, when you start talking about race and sex and gender and all that stuff, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're focusing on physical things. And all those things that make up culture are not physical things. Customs, traditions, religion, those are ideas, right? That people all sit down and agree to. But before Moses created or came down with the 10 commandments and laws and judgments, people know that they was doing wrong. You know, I don't know what the scripture is. There was one scripture where I think it was one of the early elders, I forget who it was, but he was about to sleep with, now I think they were sisters or brothers or something like that, right? But they was also married. So, you know, back in that day, again, times change, beliefs and values change, right? Because people want to look at that, man. I mean, people say that, you know, what type of God, you know, would let the things happen that happen in the Bible? Well, what type of God would it be if he didn't put that in the Bible to tell you that kind of stuff happens? You know, that's like, what type of father would you be, a parent would you be, if you don't tell your black kid, look, and you just let them go out there whimsically and not knowing, look, be careful when the police come behind you, right? What kind of parent would you be? You would be negligent. The Creator ain't negligent, right? But that's because, you know, people look at what's in there from a carnal standpoint, right? And not from a spiritual standpoint, right? It's easy to understand if you're not looking at physical things, all right? So that's the definition of culture. That's the issue. That's the thing that we have to change, all right? So we're going to talk about the foundation of principle cultures and ethos. All right. Spirituality and religion is the foundation of the principles and ethoses of most societies and cultures. Meaning, like, Jews have their culture, the Rastas got their culture, and it's based on some form of spirituality. And America is no different. That's why they say that America was supposedly, trying to escape religious persecution. That's one way you could look at it, right? But they also, and we're going to get into the doctrine of discovery here in a second, there was also the main reason why they was leaving is that it was trying to acquire more resources, acquire more wealth, acquire gold and crops and land, because you got to realize that their economic system was based on feudalism, and it was based on, okay, whoever had the land. And so, like now people talk, and this is why it's sort of like with the pandemic, we gonna have to be apart so that we could be together. And what I mean by that is white folks got to go back and learn their history, right? And we got to go back and learn our history, right? So, because there was slavery in Europe before chattel slavery, there was slavery. And the reason why they didn't have chattel slavery there is because, and I take that back, the Greek had a form of chattel slavery, but, and you can tell a lot about people by the heroes, because the European culture worshiped the Greeks, all right? Little do they know, a lot of the knowledge the Greek gods they got from Africa. And the Greeks said in their own documents, right? They called them Ethiopians. And that's a good way. I'm telling you, I'm no genius. I'm just learning these things because I want to know, right? There's this young brother got a web page. Got a channel. I'm gonna give it to you before we leave. That talks about Africa. Man, this young man is deep, and that's what I say about the circumference of your awareness, right? I don't care how young this dude, he knows something I don't know. I listen to him. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot of problem with a lot of leadership today. It's like, oh, well, who are you to tell me? Well, do you know this? Well, just shut up and listen. You know what I'm saying? You only gonna know so much about what you do. And there's a whole world of things out there that you don't know. That's the problem with 45. It's like, hey, you got scientists out there, who've been studying this stuff their whole life. You ain't never studied or had to work for nothing, don't know nothing, and don't want to know nothing. And you go try to tell, and you telling people know what you think they should do. And you got people, and this is how culture works. Culture comes from the leadership, comes from the top down. So those people gullible enough to believe in Trump, they gonna do what he say, no matter if it's to their own detriment. And that's the history of European culture throughout the age, throughout the 500 years that they've been going out, raping and pillaging other cultures, right? And when I say culture, I don't want people to get caught up. When I say European culture, that's totally different from European people. Not all European people are evil. We'll be talking about, again, that's what I'm talking about. I'm getting that down precise, right? To the problem. It's not black people or white people, right? It's the ruling class. It's those people who sanction the doctrine of discovery that I'm about to talk about, that created a culture because the lower classes didn't know. So they followed that culture of their leadership, even though it was wrong, right? So, like I said, there was we talked about that. It was talking about the spirituality and how that is the principles are laid out for cultures. I lost where I was at. It was talking about. I was talking about how all of the major three religions, Judaism and Christianity and Islam, all came from the same source. And that, I'm just getting back, I'm gonna start there, I forgot where I was at. But like I say, there were paintings, the early paintings of Jesus there were some, there were a few in the first, third, and fourth century, but the main one that really sticks with us today, it was Michelangelo's Sistine Chapels. And that occurred in about the 16th century, right? Right around the time when all of this exploring for new worlds start taking place in earnest, right? So this whole, and I start with, the reason why I start with religion, not that I'm some type of religious zealot, because that's where it started. So I have to start there, right? So, because that is the sources and the foundations. You want to know why people can watch somebody put their knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and not feel anything about it? Some people, because of their beliefs, because their value system, because they got corrupt, unprincipled value systems. And that's the European value system. It's corrupt. It's corrupt. It's unprincipled. It's unjust. And it was doing it before they came to America. They was doing it to so-called white people. And that's why a lot of them fear those rules, because they know what they're capable of. You know, and at the same time, you know, they want to be in their good graces, because they think, okay, well, yeah, I'm gonna get up there one day. Majority of you not. You forget about it. They just use you until they don't need you anymore, right? So all of this led up, I talked about all these things about principles and culture coming from religion in Europe, right? To get to this point, the doctrine of discovery, right? And let's talk about the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a false European Christian superiority that was decreed by the Pope. Stepping back a minute, there's one thing I was gonna say and I forgot. One of the biggest things, another one of those things that they got wrong, right? If you haven't seen this, read this book, there's a video. I had this video. Charlie, it's something I've been doing, studying all my life, right? They had this videos called, and I think this is they're on YouTube. It's called Christianity, 2,000 Years. And they break it down the first 1,000 years and the second 1,000 years, right? And this whole idea and concept, you're not gonna find anywhere in the Bible where Jesus told Peter that he was gonna be his successor, right? He didn't say anybody was gonna be no successor, again, because he was putting his spirit in bodies. That was the whole idea. If you want to see the whole world, tell him, oh no, he stepped out for a minute, but I got this. He put me in charge. Now they still have those demonic bodies or demonic spirits, right, in those temples or those churches. See, this whole thing about, see, that's what I say, you start out wrong, you end up wrong. Man, you got these people going, getting COVID-19, talking about a physical church. Jesus ain't had no church. He said birds got nests, foxes got, holes, and the Son of Man don't have a place to lay his head. But the Pope is another thing I did. The Pope, he is the smallest sovereign nation. Can you believe that? Go look it up. I'm not lying. He is a country. And he has wealth beyond compare. If he was so pious and he was following Yahshua's footsteps, give up all the money. He ain't gonna do that. You know that ain't gonna happen. Another example of where, and you got billions of people following this man. Especially in Europe. And if you're not following him, whatever organization you got broke off from him because they were protesting because they realized he was corrupt. So you still got all the things wrong with the Trinity and all that stuff. They got all that wrong. And now instead of the Pope, at least when you just had one Pope, one man, you didn't have all these thousands of denominations, and that's, don't get me wrong, not all ministers are evil or corrupt. They have a zeal for Yahweh, but it's not based on knowledge. It's not based on the knowledge. They have a zeal, but it's not based on the knowledge. The people perish for lack of knowledge. The preacher was wise because he gave the people knowledge. So that's what I'm saying. That's the work you got to put in, people. That's what we got to put in. Going out there in the streets, protesting, making little videos, all that stuff. If it's not based on a knowledge, an individual knowledge, it ain't gonna help nothing. So while we protesting in the street at night or in the daytime, I don't know, we'll take a shift. The morning shift, protest, and while they protesting, they got some people studying, right? Or the morning shift protest, the evening shift, study. Rotate it, something like that, but you got to do the work. That's what I'm talking about. And see, people don't want to hear this because now you got to do something. That's another thing about Christianity, right? Or most religions, right? Because they put you in this position, or they make you believe prayer is gonna change it. Just go pray. You ain't got to do nothing. But like Fannie Lou Hamer said, you can pray until, how she said, you can pray, and it wasn't until you blew in the face, but she said you can pray all you want, but if you don't get up and do something, it ain't gonna change nothing. Bottom line, and that's what the devil wants you to do. Because evil prevails when good people do nothing but pray. Prayer alone ain't gonna get it, people. So, to get back to this origin of discovery, the doctrine of discovery further, you can trace it back to the end of the 15th century, right? And actually, this is a second variation of it, right? But we're going to start with what affected America, right? In 1493, the year after Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 1492, right? Pope Alexander IV, on May the 4th, granted the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabel, a decree, the doctrine of discovery. It was a papal bull issued by Pope Alexander IV, right? In what is called the Cetera, right? Look it up, Wikipedia, it's right there, right? And the doctrine of discovery was promulgated by European monarchs in order to legitimize the colonization of lands outside of Europe between the 15th and even up to the mid 15th to the mid 20th century. This is law. This is international law, right? It's used in the United States. That's how they got the land from the Indians or Native Americans, right? And before they did it in America, they did it in Africa first. That's why they say it was the mid 15th century. In 1454, Pope Nicholas IV, right? A papal bull was written for Portugal. And this bull was gave them the right to lands in Africa, right? It confirmed the crown of Portugal dominion over all lands south of Cape Bajordo. I'm reading, right? In Africa, right? So before they started exporting Africans to the Americas, they was taking them from Africa and bringing them to Europe, right? And Dr. Claude Anderson has it. I mean, he's a national treasure, you know? And that's another thing about, what's going on with the young people. Young people, you got all the energy. You got all the energy and you got all the, you have not been corrupted, you haven't got jaded yet, after years of, doing these things and seeing these injustices, right? But what you got to do, and that coin goes both ways, you got to look to your elders who've been around to see this stuff. Because here's another thing, well, the scriptures got come in, right? Where you can, it's just another example, right? And this is why this age is an important thing, right? Moses walked the children of Israel in the desert for 40 years after they wouldn't go over to Canaan land, right? To take the land, right? Because of non-belief. Why do you think he walked them around for 40 years? Because that's about 2 generations, right? And our day, that's about 2 generations. In their generation, that's about 3 or 4, right? So they walked them around in the desert. Why? Because the people came up under the culture in Egypt, right? And they had these beliefs and value systems. Even though that they left out of Egypt, they brought that with them. So he had to walk their carcass around the desert. To those people, the majority of them died off. And in today's world, they call that corporate knowledge, right? That corporate knowledge had to die off, right? In the form of, and of course, the corporation, it doesn't die off because it stays. But then even after whoever the leader was who formed the corporation, whatever his rules and values that was set up, it becomes implicit, right? those people who came up under that leader maintain those values and beliefs. All right. That's the danger of corporations, right? They can exist into perpetuity, right? So those same ideas and values go with them forever. And so that's why it's important for young people to respect your elders and listen to them, because they have seen stuff and experienced stuff that you don't know nothing about, right? That's like when they come break back these old movies, you know, and the little kids think, oh, there's something new, man. They showed this when my grandma was a kid, right? They just came out with a new version of it. But you don't know that. They don't know that, right? And that's what happens. So it's in your best interest for young millennials, because I'm gonna tell you what, the millennials of the 20th century were the foundation, right? Some 40 years later of the civil rights movement, right? But they had that knowledge, they gained that knowledge over all those years, right? So we all need to be mindful of that, right? So that's why the doctrine of discovery is important, right? So let's get back to the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery was made it possible, right? And here's the hideous part of it, right? In essence, what the Pope said, God blessed the Europeans because they were Christians. And if you go anywhere where there are any infidels, Saracens, right? That's another word for infidels, I found out, right? If you go in any land and they're not Christians, they're savages. You're superior to them, right? And therefore, you have the right by God to take their lands, their treasures, their resources, and claim it for the king and the church. That's death. That's the religious leader. We're talking about principles. We're talking about values. That's the values of the European culture. Now, European people, that's why you need to check this stuff out, because this don't apply to all of you. If you're not in the ruling class, if you're not those people talking about, oh, we got to get back to work. And then you got some people who are in the lower class because they got the mentality of their leadership. They would go out there and catch COVID-19 for some money because they put profits before people. All right. And so I'm going to tell y'all what this does. When you get this understanding, that's why you can go and be in the background. That's why, you know, oh, I'm mad. Trust me, I'm mad. I'm mad as hell. But I decided to channel. All my life, that's how I got out of the project. I decided to channel my anger in positive ways, right? Because I seen too many friends of mine who couldn't. And they either were dead or go to jail. But not just your anger, just decisions. You know, you gotta make good decisions. And your values are going to determine that, the decisions that you make. And, you know, one small decision can make a big difference in your life. One small wrong decision can make a big difference in your life. And that's what we're saying, like this whole idea of America, right, is born on a false theology. And I got this from a book. A book written by Mark Charles and Song Chan Ra called Unsettling Truths, the Dehumanizing Ongoing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. Man, you guys got to go to Audible and pick that book up. All right. Amazing, mind-boggling, eye-opening. It's like, oh, now I get it. That superiority came from the Pope. And it wasn't about color, it was about money. It was about taking resources. As a matter of fact, at that time, it wasn't really about race, as far as black and white, because another good book that's out there, The History of White People, another amazing book on Audible, written by his sister. I forget her name at the time, but powerful book. She talks about, look, the term race was used in Europe to dehumanize other Europeans. I mean, just think about it, right? You don't hear about all these things in non-European countries that they was doing in Europe, you know, like drawing and quartering people and burning them alive, and people didn't do that kind of stuff in other places. You don't hear about it because for the most part, that history has been stolen, but it would be somewhere, you know, and people do things to people in their vicinity, you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, because other cultures were based on collectivism, they looked out for the group, right? You know, they worked together to acquire things, you know, and some of the New World, when the indigenous people that they met, and Mark Charles talks about this in his book. It's a great book, man. I can't say enough about it. But he talks about, you know, some indigenous people in South America, I think it was, who, you know, when the explorers wanted them to work for them, that's an unconceivable concept. Why we go work for a man? We work for each other. You know what I'm saying? We work for the community. Culture. We can change that. You know? We can stop working for a man or for money. What a radical concept, right? But that's what Dr. King said. There needs to be a radical revolution of values. It ain't a far stretch to get away from money. They got Bitcoin. The Federal Reserve Bank is not federal, and they don't have no reserve. That's another video on YouTube. This information is out here, people. But when you understand this, then because all the protesters are thriving off and surviving off, just like what the last one was, the last big one with all the young people was out there protesting against the corporations. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Just that just petered out because there was no strategy, and there was no strategy because you had no knowledge of what happened before and how it got to be the way that it is. And so that just petered out. What is it? Wall Street? Something on Wall Street. I forget what it was. But protests against Wall Street with all the millionaires, right? Because they just, and don't think the ruling class don't know this. And what they do is what they're doing now, right? They have knee-jerk reactions. It's like, okay, well, let's take off of some shows. They're trying to do something, right? Because the greatest thing that they fear is the masses coming after them with pitchforks. You know, they fear you, right? They fear the people when they get organized. You are that sleeping giant that Japan was worrying about, not the government. Well, actually the government, because you are the government. That's another bit of propaganda that you could thank Ronald Reagan for, right? And now we are learning, that's what I said, COVID-19 is a blessing, man. Because now we're learning that, look, government is important. But just like everything else, if you don't get up and do something, you could talk about, oh yeah, it don't make no difference for me to vote. That's a cop-out. But you're right. If you don't go vote, then you shouldn't be out there protesting, because that's the real protest. That's when the protests really count. Every election, not just presidential, especially local. That's the real protest, right? So we get down here so we again, I'm trying to lay out the trail. So you start from where those principles, values, beliefs started, right? In the Middle East, Mesopotamia, you know, with the 10 Commandments and with the Yahudas, right? And that was a culture that was set up. Then after the Messiah died, after Yahshua died, right? And he said he died so that you could live, right? And the way that you was gonna live is that those laws written on stony tables were gonna be put in your heart and mind. And to give you an example that he could do it, he took the worst of the worst persecutor of himself, Saul, called Paul. Saul. And when you talk about his spirit, he put his ideas, his beliefs, his value system in him. He knew the law. Just like a lot of these ministers and preachers know the law. But he didn't know, he didn't understand it. You know, you got levels of learning. You know, you got learning. You know, you got knowing. You know, you can learn, know, but the level of expertise is understand. If you can tell me how to do something, but not why it works, then you still got some more learning to do. You know what I'm saying? So we started back, that's where we had to start there. That's where the value system started, right? And then after he died, right? And people don't realize this 300 years gap before the Nicene Council, something was happening. Something was happening to make the Romans say, man, phew, man, these guys are like roaches, man. We can't get rid of them. Can't beat them, join them. So, you know, that's what happened. You know, here you come after his death, 33 AD. After 33 AD, there was a big gap. And again, what it's not what the media tells you or what religion tells you or what your, you know, ministers is what they don't tell you. And sometimes they don't tell you because they don't know, but sometimes they know, they don't want you to know. Right? You know, they will talk about the agnostics, right? Because one of the greatest weapons of the devil is uncertainty, right? So they say, oh, no, I'm an agnostic, meaning that, well, I think there's a Christ, but I really can't prove it. You know what I'm saying? And it's very easy to prove that there's a creator, right? You're a witness to yourself, right? And you know, people like to say play evolution against creation, right? But could it be possible that both are true? Right? Could be possible that both are true. Right? Meaning that first of all, we don't have no evidence of anything that is created out of nothing. We don't have no evidence of that. You know, you can go back and say, okay, yeah, they started as sea creatures and came upon, well, where the sea creatures come from? Well, it was Plantoa. Oh, well, where the Plantoas come from? You see, but so you got it. You can't, that's a never ending battle. You can't win that, right? And so, but what if God created the plankton, right? And it developed, that's a plausible theory. They're all theories, right? And here's the magnificence of a creator. This is how powerful and all knowing and how the wisdom of the creator, right? And I'm gonna tell you, this is why I respect elders and older people. My aunt told me one time, she just passed here, right? A few weeks ago. She had dementia. She's 97 years old. But I remember two things that all the family knows this. I have one thing she told me. She told the family, she would tell all of us all the time, all right, keep living, you'll see. We all know that because she told us that all the time. Keep living, you'll see. You know what I'm saying? But she told me one time, I was asking about something. She was a great cook, right? You know, she was domestic for years, you know, for a white family. Right, so she could burn. You know, the people that ain't got you in the house, we can't cook. You know, and so she could burn, man. And I was asking about how you fix something or how you do that. I said, T, one day I want you to teach me everything you know about cooking. She said, I can't do that. I said, why? Because then you're gonna know more than I know. Now put that in the context of the creator. He knows man. He knows the vanity of man. That's why he created them last. Right? Because he knew if he did everything that while the man did it, he was watching, he gonna try to take claim of it. Ain't that what happened in Europe? That's what happened with the Europeans. They didn't create Christianity. They didn't create faith, monotheism. They didn't even create the concept of life, living in pursuit of happiness. That's not theirs. They didn't create capitalism. That's not theirs. But they just took it and modified it for their purpose. I don't know who it was. I think it was Voltaire or somebody. But the last part of the and like I said, I ain't no scholar, but I know what I know. You see what I'm saying? And so, you know, you better come with me with something, you know, because I know some things. You know I don't know everything, right? But I think Voltaire gave it was actually life, liberty, and the right to own property. They couldn't put that in the Constitution because they didn't want every man to have the right to own property, right? Only landowners could have property. You know, that there was a certain class who can only have property. You know what I'm saying? Only landowners can vote, but still, you had to have some means. And if you know, everybody had. And so when I finally found that out, I thought that was funny because I said that don't even fit to me. Life. Oh, that's good. Yeah, everybody had the right to life. Liberty. Yeah, everybody had the right to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. What the hell is that? That's vague. And that's how they do things. They come up. I learned that from Claude Anderson. You know, he said that's what they come up with these vague ideas, right? Nebulous. I mean, they're just, you know, something that okay, you can't. What the hell is that? You know what I'm saying? And that's what European culture has done. Look at our music. They didn't create jazz. They didn't create art. They didn't create rock and roll. They didn't create any of that. But look who benefited from it. They didn't create monotheism, but look who benefit from it. They always say we profit greatly in Jesus. Why are we going to change the name? It's working for us. These are things that we got to understand, right? Because then that gives us something to focus on. It gives us something to work with, a strategy and what to target and who to target. How you going to fight an enemy if you don't know who the enemy is? How you going to fight him if you don't even know you're in a fight? Warren Buffett told you, hey, look, there's a class war. And my class winning. The ruling class don't want you to know that you're in a war. Because in, what is that? Sun Tzu. Man, hey, you know, but and it'll come to me. But in his book, he says, you know, hey, you know, there's a way that you fight. If you don't have to pick up weapons and win the war, well, then fight that way. You know what I'm saying? Use what you have available to you. You know? I almost said it. Something of war. But anyway, that's what we got to understand. So I'm trying to put these pieces together. We got principles laid out in Mesopotamia by nine people, people of color, right? That that the Creator gave them a way of life, principles and stuff to follow, right? And again, that's the only story that we tell, right? But like I said, scholars will tell you, you can go all around the world and they had those basic same principles in almost every society. When they came to Africa, they had a set of rules and principles, right? And that's why they listened to them, because, oh yeah, this sounds like our God. You know what I'm saying? That's interesting, because they were interested in knowing that, right? They were interested because they believed that they were in harmony. See, that's another different thing from Europeans, right? Europeans think that they control, right? European culture, believe in controlling the environment and not they are part of it, right? That they can master the earth and dominate the earth and its inhabitants. You ever think about, when you talk about dominating the earth, what are you made of? That's what I'm talking about. They took the devil out of the earth and put him under the earth. And it took God and took him out of the earth and put him in the heavens. Now they in charge. Ain't nobody else around. You know? That's what the devil do, right? Well, shoot, don't nobody look better than me and know anything more than me. I must be the one. So starting from there, that whole cultural concept, Mark Charles calls it, I think, the pathological religious belief or religious fiction, right, is what gave them Christianity. That religious fiction of superiority that they put in the doctrine of discovery. Then about 100 years later, in the 17th century, you have Adam Smith comes up with the theory. Adam Smith wasn't a bad dude. Adam Smith, the capitalism that they practice now isn't the same. He believed in regulation. He knew the treacheries of men. As a matter of fact, he wrote another book before he wrote about capitalism. I forget the name of the book. This is a classic, but I'm talking so. But I know it's out there. me tell you something else I learned when I was instructing in the military. You ain't got to know everything. You don't have to know everything. You got to know where to find it, though. See what I'm saying? Now, I don't need all that stuff in my head right now. I got enough stuff in my head. But when I need to go to it, I know where to find it. That's how we got to stop thinking, y'all, and not let people intimidate you. Question everything. Everything and everybody. I had a commanding officer told me, he said, look, he told all of us, he said, look, if somebody gives you an order and they can't explain why you need to do the order, if of course you can't do that in the battlefield, right? But when we're not in the battle condition, if somebody gives you an order and they can't give you an explanation why you need to do it, then it's obviously not a good order, right? And you have the right to say, question that, right? But there's a way of doing it. It told us, now another thing I did in military, I was a facilitator, workshop facilitator. And I taught Navy rights and responsibilities. And the question was, do you lose your rights when you're in the military? No, you don't lose any rights. They're restricted because of the nature of the business that you're in. When you're in a time of war, right? When you're in a battle, heat of battle, you don't have time to question orders, right? Unless it's an unlawful order, right? Unless they're telling you to kill innocent people, you don't have to follow that, right? And then that's where your morals and values and culture kicks in, right? But other than that, in peacetime, and they give you order, and if they can't explain it, it don't make sense, then they need to go work on that. And you have the right to to challenge that. And that should apply not just in the military, at your job. You telling me to do something that don't make no sense to do. If you want me to be a good worker, I should be able to tell you, hey, boss, that don't make sense. But that's where culture comes in. Look at Donald Trump. And that's all I got to say. Look at him. You can't challenge him. He is dumber than snot, but they can't challenge him. They're intimidated by him. That's important. Question everything, right? So we got from how religion to the doctrine of discovery. And then from the doctrine of discovery, we talked about capitalism, right? In its original concept, Wealth of Nations is the book, right? By Adam Smith. But in its original context, he believed in regulations. He believed in, he didn't believe in monopolies. And he knew, because he knew the greed of his countrymen. He knew the greed of other European. I think he was Scottish, something like that. And he was a philosopher. They didn't even have economics then. Economics was based on his theories, right? And so think about that. We have an economy based on a 500 something year idea, theory, right? How much the world has changed since then, right? But the ruling class don't want to change that because it works for them. It's working for them. That's why they want to reform it. You can't reform something that's corrupt from the beginning. That's like pouring ink in water and you can't reform that water. You might be able to recreate it, right? Transform it to something else, but you ain't gonna reform it. It ain't gonna never be water again. So that's my problem with Joe Biden. Joe, you just part of the problem. I'm not telling you not to vote for Joe Biden. I'm not saying that. I'm gonna vote for him. Here's another European concept, or European, let's just say, a ruling class concept, right? Again, they always focus on the negative. Notice that, right? They tell you, That's all right. Just go ahead on and choose the lesser of two evils. Just hold your nose and choose somebody. No. Use your mind's eye, right? That's another problem. We use our eyes' mind instead of our mind's eye. Go figure that out, right? And instead of, all right, weighing all of the issues, right? And weighing what's in your best interest. That's the whole point. We're going to get to cultural hegemony. That's what cultural hegemony does, right? Makes you think that the ruling class best interest is the same as yours, and it's not, right? So we're going to get from there, from capitalism, right? This is why they were in the colonies, right? It's in the mid 1600s that this whole idea of capitalism come up, and I went back to religion because the only thing he said in the Wealth of Nations was that, you know, that market. This is where this whole market economy comes from. He came up with the idea that, well, you know, the market will be controlled by the what do they call that? The something hand, man. I hate when I do this. I got that. But it'll come to me. But this hand, this magic mystical hand is what controls the market, right? There's no science behind that, right? In fact, the science and the data shows you that it's inconsistent. You know, it has cycles. That's part of the market. They're gonna have down and up markets, right? And you know that whole idea, like that's why Bush, Senior Bush, one of the things I agreed with him on, and I don't agree with a politician on everything. It's just that I weigh it out. You know, okay, I agree with you on that, but what about this other stuff, right? And you usually come down to social issues, right? And fiscal issues too, for the most part, right? But you know, Bush called it voodoo economics because they know it's voodoo economics. You know, ain't no way. First, let me tell you this, man. When one of the reasons why there was a lot of wealth accumulated after World War II was that there was a GI Bill, right? That people was able to get property, right, and invest in that property. But two, they had a different kind of economy, right? The consumer economy was just getting started, right? And but they also believe, because I remember coming up, one of the things they used to tell us, you know, they're talking about finances right now, you know, about financial literacy. But what they taught when I was a kid, save some money, you know, always put something on the side, right? Pay yourself first, save something. They don't tell you that. Just what did George Walker tell you, right? After after 9/11, just go spend some money. This type of consumer economy is not sustainable. You can't do that forever. The resources on the planet is finite. You know what I'm saying? So we go from religion, from creation to the doctrine of discovery to Adam West and capitalism, and then we get to community policing and white privilege. Now, again, this was before this was a nation, right? This was why when in the colonies, right? And one of the myths, or one of the things that they don't want you to tell you, that they don't want you to teach in school, is that blacks and whites have come together on several occasions to overthrow to they figured out who their common enemy was, which was the ruling class, right? So the first indentured European and African slaves, indentured Africans and enslaved Africans, you know, they would have uprisings. And one of the most memorable, even though it wasn't as big, it was memorable because it caused the planters, that's the ruling class at the time, you know, the slave owner, plantation owners, they said, look, man, we can't let these people organize. Those revolts were the first real unions. They started to come together and say, look, man, he ripping us off too. You know what I'm saying? No, we ain't gonna take this. Now, sadly, Bacon's rebellion was really the black and the white European, the black European, the white indentured servers, black indentured servers, and the enslaved Africans was led by Bacon, who was a colonist, but he was led by them to fight against the Indians, right? To take the Indians' land. Now, that's wrong, but I'm just making the point, right? You got to tell all of it, right? But still, they came together against the governor at the time of Jamestown, right? They came together and they attacked. They had a rebellion, right? And they had to call out the militia and to settle it. But what happened after that, right? This was like in 1676, and they kept having these small rebellions, right? Where the blacks and the whites was coming together, right? And this is what the ruling class do, right? They'll either make reforms or they'll make it harder, right? It's sort of like Pharaoh in the building, making bricks without straw. Oh, you won't complain? Oh, you think it was hard before? Well, see how hard it is. Let me see you do it without this straw. And that's what they did, right? How did they go? When they think they're whipped, then they want to make concessions. That's what's going on right now. So I'm saying you got to understand this. You got to know what happened then to understand what's happening now, right? All right. What you were when is what you are now. So you got to understand that, right? So in the beginning of the 18th century, in 1705, after all these rebellions, the plantation owners in Virginia, slave owners, landholders in Virginia came up with these slave codes, right? Again, you can look all this information up. I'm just telling you from what I know off the top of my head. All right, but essentially what the slave cause did was, first, that was the first community police. All right? And that was the separation of blacks and whites. So what they gave, they wasn't giving poor whites no land or nothing, but what they gave them was privileges. Literally, privileges. That's why the term white privileges come up. They gave them privileges because now they think because you share that whiteness that you share the same ideology and values, but you don't. But that's what they gave the poor indentured white Europeans, right? Say, look, blacks can't have weapons, no kind of weapon, right? They can't go anywhere without any papers, right? And you know that they can't talk this way. They gotta give whites respect, you know. And no white man had to respect any slave. I'm just paraphrasing, all right? But basically, that's where they got that privilege and authority. In fact, just like the doctrine of discovery, somebody who didn't have any authority to give people rights over other people gave them the right to say that, no, you're superior. See the connection with the doctrine of discovery? Now a lot of these slaves, indentured servants were there before the European immigrants, right? In fact, the slaves, after the slave codes, most of them were there longer than all of the immigrants. But the ruling class gave them authority over the slave, over the enslaved Africans, right? So they could have guns, they could have weapons, right? And this is where the community policing came in. Fugitive slave laws came in effect, right? So any black slave, right? First of all, if an indentured servant got caught running away, they would extend a contract. And this was business, y'all. They extend a contract, right? A slave ran away, he was got to go get whipped, or if he was a threat to cause problem, he was gonna get hanged or burned. They always talk about hanging, but you know, this we talking about, you know, you talking about stepping on knee on somebody's neck. They burned people alive, and it was sport. White people, you got to know this. I like to say Europeans who self-identify as white. That's why you don't think about it. You don't have to think about privileges. When you got them, it just seems natural in the way the thing's supposed to be. But this is how you got them. That's what white privilege is. Don't mean that, you know, because you're white, you better off. You poor white and poor black. But the one thing that you got, put it this way, you ain't gonna see y'all get your knee. No black man ain't gonna be able to put the knee on your neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and nothing not happen. That's a privilege. So I don't care how poor you are, right? That ain't gonna happen to you without other whites uproar coming uproar. You know, not without on live television in front of everybody. That ain't gonna happen. They wouldn't do that in Europe. That's why you didn't have the type of servitude that they had. You might get a beating, but you wasn't getting lashed to your blood, you know. I mean, not to the degree that slaves were beaten and abused, mistreated, you know. So that's where that comes in, all right? So then you move from there, you move upward from the beginning of the 18th century, 1705 with slave codes. And then you have the, let's see. Let me see if my thing is still, recording's still going. Been talking a long time. Yeah, it's still recording. All right, so they came from there to the Declaration of Independence, to American Revolution. Now there's another great author, and we have a lot of authors and scholars out here, man. And I don't know why I do this with name. Gerald Horne, great historian. And he calls the revolution of 1776 the counter-revolution of 1776. Because what he was saying was that the real cause, the reason why they protested against Britain, right, was because they were about to end the slave trade, right? And it was like, oh, snap, you know, this is our bread and butter, you know? So look, we're gonna have to break away from them because they're going a different direction than we going, right? And if we gotta keep making this money, again, the love of money, we're gonna have to break away from them because we gonna keep these slaves, right? And we gonna keep this land from the Indians, you know what I'm saying? What we don't have already, we're gonna take. Just another perspective. That's another thing. We gotta start writing our own narrative or telling our own narrative, right? Don't matter really if it's true or not, because none of the narratives that we've been given has been true, but it's ours. We have to start telling our own narratives, live by our own truths. You know, that's what I'm saying. You know, the greatest power that African Americans have is history, culture, and truth. And so in 1776, you know, despite this whole, you know, this thing they talk about tea and, you know, all that stuff, taxation and all that stuff without representation, you know, that's I ain't saying that's the only motive. That was probably the biggest taxation, because that's how they were gaining their wealth. All right. So now we got up to that. So that's how slavery, or how, again, you had the doctrine of discovery that is law, right? It's written into law. Then you have slave codes that's written into law. How this culture comes from something that is just a value or belief system, and now it's into the system. It's written into the system, right? And then, so when they start writing this Declaration of Independence, you know, they wasn't going to say life, liberty, and ownership of property, because, well, then, you know, you can't, a slave, they knew slaves were men and women, because if they thought they was beasts, then that's bestiality. They knew they were men and women, so they couldn't say that, you know. And they know they had, you know, poor white people. They didn't want them included. That's why they don't want everybody to vote, because they're afraid of the masses. That's why they came up with a republic, right? That's part of the reason. And it makes sense to a degree, but they came up with a republic than a straight up democracy, right? Because democracy, and a democracy, winner take all. You know what I'm saying? In a true democracy. So there's some valid reasons for having a republic. Constitution is a good thing, but not when it's flawed. You know, not when it's written. And the only Western doctrine for freedom that's ever really been written, where there's only real true democracy, is Haiti. Haiti scared the bejesus out of the Americans, right? But at the same time, they don't give them credit. They don't give the Haitians credit for half of America. Because Overture if he didn't defeat Napoleon, we wouldn't have got the Louisiana territory. We don't get credit for that. Black people don't get credit for that. Half of the United States, they talk about reparations. We should get that half from the Mississippi, you know, on west. Because if it wasn't for that overthrow, that win there, they wouldn't have got it. But Haitian had the only constitution that everybody is free. And that's another thing you guys complain about, you know, all of the rights and stuff that we do get, they end up being more beneficial to the what do they call it? The classes those classes like race, those classes like race and sex and all those are the classes, right? It ends up being more beneficial to, like, in the first civil rights movement after the War of Reconstruction, and Dr. Claude Anderson calls that the Second American Revolution, because that's what it really was. Because the first 12 of the first 12 amendments were for white people. 13, 14, and 15, that's a new constitution. That was written for black people because they wasn't written into 1 through 12. All right. So with that, and with the with the acquisition of the new land, and here's the other thing about Haiti. All right. This is why it's important for you to understand history, and not just black history. All history is black history. All right. That's another thing that Mark Charles talks about in his book. You know, he said, another author had mentioned how the problem with America is we don't have a common history. That's how you got MAGA, Make America Great Again, because they don't share the same history, even though we live in the same country, right? And it's not that history, it didn't happen. They don't acknowledge that history, right? And we know it, right? And that's why it's important for white people not only to learn black history, learn your own history. You know what I'm saying? We both got work to do. And we need to learn their history, and they need to learn our history. So like I said, with COVID, we're going to have to be apart before we can come together. You know what I'm saying? And for those white people who, you know, who down with the cause and, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Woke. If you woke, then you need to go back and wake up some of your people. We don't need you sitting here with us. They need you, right? If you really want to do something for the cause, go back and speak truth to ignorance. See, you always talk about speaking truth to power. That's easy, because 9 times out of 10, the power know that you're right. They're just trying to stop you from getting it, you know, what you're asking for, you know, what you're trying to get. But when you're speaking truth to ignorance, that's hard, because they don't know what you're trying to get, and they don't know what they need. You know, that's just, you know, that, like, you know, you trying to prevent the con artists from ripping them off, but they trying to tell you the con artist right. And you tell them, no, man, this, look, I'm telling you, that's a shell game. Ain't got nothing to either one of them shell. No, man, that's right, it's right. No. All right, man, I'm trying to tell you. That's why you got to be able to discern your enemies, right? Just because you have your skin don't mean that they're your kin. And just because they're your kin don't mean they're your friend. You know? So, but like I said, now we get up to the first civil rights movement. That's what it really was, or you can call it the Second Revolutionary War after Reconstruction. And white people have had opportunities. That was an opportunity for them to make amends, right? To change their ways, right? And that's what I'm saying about right now. Because after that first civil rights movement, 1865, by 1880, all that stuff was gone. Reconstruction was ended. And then from 1880 to the turn of the century in 1900, all the gains they made were taken away. That's when Jim Crow got instituted, segregation, right? So fast forward to 1965, second civil rights movement, right? In the 60s, mid-60s, 1965 to roughly 1980, right? We made significant gains, especially from 65 to the 70s, right? And what we lost in the 70s with that solidarity, that common purpose, We all in the same boat. We confuse integration of power with integration of neighborhoods. Again, confusing the physical with the, I don't want to say spiritual, but abstract, let's put it like that. Right? You know, we looking at, you know, we was looking at integrating resources, right? Integrating that money, right? Integrating that power, right? That didn't happen. What happened? 1980, Reagan, right? He's the first one to start talking about states' rights again. What Trump doing this weekend, whenever his convention is, or whenever his first rally gonna be, Juneteenth, next weekend in Oklahoma, he ain't the first one to do that. Just like his campaign started off just like Reagan. But again, it goes back to the values of the people. Like I said, show me a person hero. Show me your hero, and I can tell you who you are. And a lot of these same people who are out here now, you're talking about, you know, they woke. They were Reaganites. And some of the Reaganites are Donald Trump, are Trumpers. You know what I'm saying? And who's Trump hero? Adolf Hitler. He had Mein Kampf by his bed. He read I don't know if he read it, I don't know if he slept on it or what, but he had Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf was, you know, his reading. Now, if nothing else told me not to vote for him, that did. But I was, you know, it didn't take that. I mean, I can just, you know, assess what he's saying and, you know, discern the lies that he made. You know, look, man, this man ain't got no, he don't have no honor. He don't have no principles. Wouldn't vote for him. But that's because a large swath of the American population, a large majority of people of European heritage has the same values that he has. And like I say, I'm just telling you the facts, because he had to get a majority of the white vote to even come close enough to steal the election. So you think those people who vote for Trump are any different from police officers? We just see with police officers, the streets of the police officers' office, but you don't think those same people work with you? You don't think those same people come out and do your audits? You know, do your assessments? Sell you property? Think about that. That's why it's bigger than race. That's why we have to pivot off of race, pivot on the culture. Why? Because now we're controlling the narrative. All right? They don't know how to deal with narrative. They don't know how to deal with culture. All right? And that's what always happens. That's what Trump doing now with the Juneteenth thing. Don't let that distract you, take you off focus. All right? And that's what we should be doing. Develop our own narrative, our own strategy, and our own plan, and work with it in conjunction with protesting. You know, that's what we should be doing. That's what I said after we went into, that's what I said on my first podcast, you know, that This is a blessing. COVID-19 is a blessing because it's giving us time. And do you realize the most valuable asset that any of us has is time? And do you know that's what the ruling class dominates? Your time. You know, there's all type of theories, sociological theories. I forget the name of the one. I'm sorry, y'all, I'm just rambling off the top of my head, but there's just one particular social theory. I forget the name of it. But and some of you probably gonna know what I'm talking about. So hit me up on the podcast, you know, like comments and tell me. But there's this law, this social theory that says that, you know, people have to have levels of security, right? Before they can start, they gotta take care of their base needs first. Food, water, housing, right? Before they can start thinking about ideologies and stuff like that. It's hard to think about ideologies when you're hungry. It's hard to think about principles when you're hungry. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why, you know, we have the ruling class keeps you working 40 and 60-hour weeks. 40, 60-hour work weeks, work cycles, you know, in a week. Because you only got 24 hours in a day. If you're working 8 to 10 hours, you got 14 hours left, you know, to bathe, to, you know, take care of your kids, to grocery shop, to do all other things, and you got to sleep. And let's just say 6 of that 14 hours is sleeping, because we ain't sleeping 8 hours no more. I know I only get about 4, if I'm lucky, you know. So, you know, 6 hours, you're working 8 to 10 hours, you're sleeping, I said 4 to 6 hours. Now that leaves you 8 hours, right, of those 14. And now you got to eat, you got to wash, you got to bathe, you got to make groceries. If you got kids, you got to do homework. So what time do you have to develop yourself? None. None. And so hopefully, you know, we can keep track. I'm trying to keep on my train of thought as far as, you know, understanding the origin. I'm trying to take you back from the origin to where we are now. That's what I'm doing. I'm laying those things out for you. All right. So we up to the second civil rights era, right? That's in 1965 through 80, right? And so from 80 to 2000s, what started happening? We started, Republicans started taking over state legislatures. You have organizations like Alex that were putting together legislation for corporations to just send to legislatures or lobby, right? You had all these rulings in these eras, right? Clinton, they flipped Clinton, you know, to start instituting conservative policies, going along with Reaganism. He's a fan of Reagan, you know what I'm saying? And making these, you know, unintended consequences in policies like, you know, reducing welfare and crime bills and stuff like that. That's what I'm saying. That's that culture. There ain't that much difference between the ideology of neoliberals and conservatives, you know, right-wing Democrats and right-wing conservatives, you know. Even moderate Democrats have more in common with liberal Democrats than they do with moderate Democrats have more in common with right-wing Democrats nowadays than they do with liberal Democrats. And then, Bernie called Bernie Sanders a socialist. That's another thing I missed, right? At the end of the 19th century, right? Marx, now this is another thing, question everything. Marx hit the nail on the head about capitalism. And that's why he's the big boogeyman, right? First thing he's gonna tell you, he's a communist, right? And then they talk about socialism, right? Those are ideologies. There's theories, right? Economic theories, right? And the data is in now on capitalism, right? And the data is in on Marxism too. But we haven't had a real truly socialist government anywhere, right? Where, and this is what you got to understand, what capitalism is that's when the ownership of production is in the private hands, right? And you have certain liberties and freedoms, right? So you're not totally totalitarian, like in a communist society, where the state controls, the economy and everything, right? But private industry, that's why they're privatizing everything. That's a form of dictatorship, right? So in socialism, right, the people determine what happens. They control productivity, right? And what happened from the 70s on to now, and this was not a coincidence, right? As a matter of fact, a lot of things started changing in the 70s, right after those laws were passed, right? In 68, right? Housing laws and all those laws was passed in the 60s. By 1970, you had a guy who was a lawyer, but Nixon appointed him as Supreme Court Justice. What is his name? I gotta stop doing. Let me look up his name. Powell. The Powell memo. The Powell memo. Right. That's after they came out with all the uprisings in the 60s, right, over Vietnam. Came up with the Powell memo. And this is right around the same time that the Southern Strategy was devised for Nixon, right? And they go hand in hand, because the Southern Strategy made Northern Democrat Dixiecrats, right? And that's when he said you got to stop, because they knew that the Northern Democrats and the Northern white folks didn't care for black folks no more than Southern, but they wasn't gonna say nigga, nigga, nigga. They just didn't want you in their unions. They didn't have separate water fountains, but you still had to get your secondhand service. You still couldn't eat at the table, So it was the same, a difference without a distinction. So what they did is that they incorporated that bias in the North with the bias in the South, and you got now what you got. They started out as Nixon Republicans, then Reagan Republicans, and the rest is history. So we got to understand these things. We got to connect the dots. One of the things that I told off script. The last thing I was on was policies and policing, community policing, and and actually I never got to, I got on this track ahead of myself. So let's talk about cultural hegemony, right? And that's the basis of the Western colonial imperialist civilization, which is now the dominant culture globally, right? And America is the military and economic hegemon. Hegemon is just a Greek word that means dominant, right? The leadership group, right? And for quite a few years, I've been trying to point out the fact that, what I said earlier, that we misdiagnosed the problem in America as race. It's culture, right? And so we need to check out what hegemony is and just look it up. You can look that up on the web too. The easiest place to find it is at Wikipedia. And listen to this. All right, this is tell you what this is, right? A Marxist philosophy, cultural hegemony is the domination of a culturally diverse society by the ruling class who manipulate the culture of that society. The beliefs and explanations, precepts, values, and mores, get that, they manipulate the culture of that society's beliefs, explanations, perception, values, and mores, so that the imposed ruling class worldview becomes an accepted cultural norm. The universally valid dominant ideology, which justifies the social, political, and economic status quo as natural and inevitable. In other words, you've been going along with this thing with capitalism for so long, you figure, hey, well, you ain't got no other choice. This is the only choice. We can't do Marxism. They say Marxism is bad. We can't do communism. We definitely not gonna. So you ain't got, make you believe you ain't got another choice, right? So they said the universally valid dominant ideology, which justifies the social, political, and economic status quo as natural and inevitable, perpetual, and beneficial for every social class, rather than as an artificial social construct that benefit only the ruling class. This Marxist analysis of how the ruling capital classes, the bourgeoisie, establishes and maintains its control was originally developed by the Italian philosopher and politician Antonio Gramsci. In philosophy and in sociology, the term cultural hegemony has denotations and connotations derived from the ancient Greek word homogeneo, hegemony, indicating leadership and rule. In politics, hegemony is the geopolitical method of indirect imperial dominance, like a puppet government or a banana republic, with which the hegemon, that's the leader state, rules subordinate states by the threat of intervention and implied means of powers rather than the threat of direct rule, such as military invasion, occupation, and annexation. Those are the last. That's why they want to have that strong military force, so that when the country can't follow, don't fall into line with their rules, well then, they can't fight. They ain't gonna try to fight us. They're just a losing battle. And while something crossed my mind when I was talking about that cultural hegemony, I hope it comes back to me. But I forget it. But Antonio Gramsci was an Italian, and he was imprisoned by Mussolini during the fascist movement, right? And he wrote these books, right? And it's amazing. A lot of people talk about how much Marx got wrong, but he got a lot of stuff right. You got to consider, they looking back in hindsight with all the information and history of all these decades that they can go by. This man, he figured this out for himself. You know what I'm saying? And Gramsci took Marx's ideas, right? And what Marx believed was that, look, the proletariat, that's what they call the working class, that, he wanted them to uprise and overthrow the ruling class, right? Which is essentially what's happening in Russia, right? But what Gramsci was saying, and what they thought the same thing would happen in capitalist countries, because they saw their working condition was horrible, in that period of time, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And they just figured that the working class would rise up against them, right? Because, they figured in totalitarian governments, right? Like the Tsar and stuff, they had armies to put down rebellions. But that's if all the people, people in the armies have families, and if they ain't doing good, it's hard to keep their loyalty, But they was Gramsci was saying, I wonder why we know they get catching hell. Look at the black folks, they're catching hell. Look at the poor white farmers in America. Why they don't rise up against them? And so even after Mussolini put him in jail, right, incarcerated him for nearly the last half of his life, he came up with these memos, this tablet that he wrote down all of his theories about cultural hegemony, and it's fascinating. That's another piece that I don't have any books on it, but I read enough on it. Again, great source of information. YouTube, Netflix, Audible. That's where you're gonna get the real information and knowledge. If you depend on mainstream television, they're run by the ruling class. So that always amazes me when people say, "What the media?" Well, the media is the ruling class, folks. They're not gonna do a damn thing to help us. The only reason why they show these they ain't gonna show you everything, and they skew, what they do show you. All right. The media is the ruling class. Rupert Murdoch and all, they only got about 6 actual, if there's that many now, television owners, station owners, cable and television. And cable is a monopoly, But what people are doing now, I heard or read that there are some municipalities that you see, because the technology has gotten old enough now where they can do their own networks and their own internet service. And there's some municipalities that are doing that, and it's faster and cheaper. All right, and that's the kind of innovation that we're gonna have to come up with to beat these jokers, because they're ripping us off, baby, all the way to the bank. That's what we was talking about, that productivity. From 1970 to now, man, American workers have been more productive than any people ever. And this is where they're stealing from you. And you don't want to tax them. Look, man, the way rich people get rich is they keep their money. They're money hoarders. They're not going to put no money back in the system unless you make them do it. That's why Roosevelt had the high taxes on. It was a check and balance, right? Now, after they let the horse out the gate out the barn with that decision, that Supreme Court decision that says that corporations of people, it's all over, folks. It's going to take something major. We can't reform this system. We can transform it, but we can't reform it. And the way we transform it, how about we do this? How about this next revolution? And the founding fathers saw this. They I don't know who it was. I can't remember who it was. I'll have that information for you next time. But I know I don't know if it was Jefferson, Hamilton, or Washington. They wrote, we're going to have to pay. God is not going to look well on us, for this thing, this slavery thing here. They knew that. They knew that their reckoning was going to have to come. And it has to come. It's coming now. But it won't come if we don't change the culture. So I'm going to wrap it up. I've been going way too long. My partner's not going to like this, that. Tell me chop it up. But I get rolling, I keep going. I'm going to have to do better. But let's see. But that's where we're at. We're at cultural hegemony. All right. So, yeah. So the next step after protest, and that's why I went all this, the next step. All this, what I told you, is first understanding, the origins of how these things came to be as they are. All right. But I tell you, the greatest weapons against cultural hegemony are history, culture, and truth. History connects people to a location. History connects people to a land or a location. But culture connects people to what they do. All right. And so the only way we defeat Trump's lies and ignorance, the only thing that beats lies is the truth. The only thing that beats ignorance is knowledge. All right. And like I said, knowledge, wisdom, and truth is the only thing that beats lies, ignorance, and fear. And the answer to the global crisis of inequity and injustice is what Dr. King talked about. Dr. King talked about, they always have this whitewash Dr. King between 1963 and 67, when he became really radical. And he started talking about the Vietnam War. Right? In one of his last speeches a year before he died, where he made a speech about the radical revolution of values. That's what we're talking about now. I'm gonna go to that, I'm gonna wrap it up with that. And call it a good night. And then the next time, I think I'm gonna start out with more history. We're gonna start talking about Carter G. Woodson and W.E.B. Du Bois. He's a great historian. He wrote the history of the civil war. And Carter G. Woodson was also, both of those guys were the first two to graduate from Harvard. Both of them were historians, all right? And that's where a lot of our history came from. Carter G. Woodson, Black History Week, which is Black History Month. All right. These men were way ahead of their time. Way ahead of their time. So I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna play this YouTube video about revolutionary values. before I get to that, I'm going to tell you about, another little thing I want to touch on. I think I did already. I'm all over the place, but that's all right. Joe Biden, like I said, Joe, I think you're on the wrong side of history. I think you already have been. You know, the only thing you did right was accept the VP for Barack Obama. Ain't the only thing he did right, because Joe Biden had it bad, man. He just is culturally conditioned, right? That's the result of cultural hegemony, you know. He is no Donald Trump. At least Joe has some principles and has some moral. His ideology is more akin to Trump and the ruling class, right? As opposed, because these things are working for him or the people who he worked for, right? And see, with this, with all this money from lobbying, right? The Congress, especially the Senate, don't work for us. They work for the lobbyists, because that's who gets them elected. That's why we got to have campaign reform, right? And get money out of politics, right? So Joe, I already made a rational decision. I was leaning more to what I would vote if the primary would have went on. Again, this is how the European social system that cultural hegemony works. So the so-called liberal ruling class, who don't want change, right? They want to reform it, right? They came together and supported Biden, because Bernie, while he has, everybody got issues, ain't nobody perfect. Bernie wasn't owned by as many of them as Joe is. And he had a following, you know, of people who were the proletariat, the working class. And that's what they're afraid of. So Joe, if you really want to impress people, if you really want to make history, you ought to make Sanders your VP. That's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. Just like they ganged up, you and all your crew, Cory Booker and all the rest, you know, came to your camp for their team, you know. Now you need to bring in Bernie for our team. That'll be a check and balance, all right? And then the other thing I see, you know, stop all this pandering. I'm insulted when you tell me, you know, before you tell me what the person idea is, are you telling me they're female or male? I mean, female or black. No, tell me the ideas. Bernie had good ideas. Bernie had revolutionary ideas. See, and that's because you're not a revolutionary, Joe. You know? I don't know how much Bernie is, but he talk a pretty good game. You know? And so if you really want to impress the people and really want to win this by a landslide, you ought to make Bernie your VP. And the second part of that is, white men created this problem. I do not want to see a black person or a woman, you know, come in and make these changes, right? Because actually, those white men gonna fight you harder, just like they fought Barack harder. That's why I was pulling for Bernie against Hillary, you know, because, you know, and the same reason why I voted for Barack, on top of the fact that he was black, he's a man. And, you know, that's the way it is. These white men they'd rather hear from, Now, actually, I think they'd rather hear from a white woman, any white woman, but Hillary. That was her problem, right? And they settled for, a black man. The majority of white people couldn't stomach Hillary because of Bill. But I think if you bring anybody else than another white man, and that's why I wanted Bernie over Hillary. Because these white men, and another thing is like, they're more apt to listen to a white man, and he understands them because he's a white man, right? And so I think Joe ought to make Sanders his VP. And then the other thing, right, from a historical standpoint, if he wants his legacy to move beyond Barack, right, I think he and Bernie, if they both on the same ticket, what they do is that they start putting together the team to transition, right? Both of these cats gonna be in their 80s, man. And while, like I say, I respect knowledge and wisdom, but these people aren't keeping up with the technology, right? The technology has passed them by. You know what I'm saying? And what we need more in government are people who are used to fixing problems, not lawyers, who used to litigation. We need the people who know how to fix problems and understand the technology and to be able to deal with the new robber barons and technology, right? You guys are not gonna do that. You guys aren't capable of doing that. I'm sorry. I don't care how many people you get around you. You need the people in power who understand that. So what I say is that, you come together, put together those people on a team, and then both of you guys agree to step down after you set up. And I'm telling you, in those 4 years, now we got to do our part, right? They come together, they start cleaning, in the next election cycle, we start cleaning up the Congress, and by the next re-election, if we got enough people out of Congress who don't support the people, then y'all stay in another 4, right? But if we get that transition where we got the majority in both the House and the Senate, right, you guys step down and let some young people take over. That's what I think ought to happen. That's just my opinion. The other thing I wanted to talk about was Drew Brees. I wasn't so surprised by what he said the second time because I heard him the first time. So I wasn't surprised. I was just more disappointed than I was the first time because I thought he was a smarter man. I mean, how tone deaf do you have to be, or how blind do you have to be, or how unattached you have to be to not see this time what's going on and to come out and make a statement like that. Dude, what world you living in, But I say this about Drew. I'm not a Drew Brees defender. I was really hurt the first time, right? He said it. And that's when I stopped looking at football. I think I stopped looking at football the year after they took Cap out of the league. And so I stopped watching the NFL, and I'm a Saints fan. My house is black and gold. True blue fan. This is what we're talking about, getting back to, what you got to do. See, because the problem with the American people, black and white, the working class, is we done got too comfortable. We're not willing to sacrifice. It's got to come with sacrifice. And we can't even sacrifice. Just think what the people who in the Montgomery boycott and the Freedom Riders, those people sacrificed it all And you got jokers who can't even turn off a television now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm saying, like Dave Chappelle told whatchamacallit, I said, look, Drew, I heard what you said. I believe it when I see it. You know what I'm saying? I distinguish, you know, your football career from your politics, right? That's just like O.J. Simpson. You know, I celebrate, I don't combine his accomplishments on the field, because his accomplishment on the field was his accomplishment. You can't take that away from him, you know? But as a hero, can't be a hero, can't be my hero, you know? And see, that's the thing that separate real heroes, right? That's the thing that separate Muhammad Ali from Michael Jordan. Who else? LeBron is more conscious. I don't know how conscious Kobe was, but definitely Michael Jordan, right? That's what separate a Muhammad Ali from them. A Muhammad Ali from Floyd Mayweather. You know, I remember I heard him say one time, he was better than Ali. I said, man, if that was true, you would never even be able to carry Ali's jockstrap, because you're money hungry. You don't have any principles. You don't have any values. You know, everything is about a dollar, you know, and you ain't made no real sacrifices for the cause other than yourself. So I say the same thing Dave Chappelle told the president. I'm gonna give him a chance. I'm gonna give him a chance. And I say to all the hypocrites who kept watching NFL after Drew said it the last time, and after Cap took his knee, I think you ought to give him a chance too. Because you ain't, you know, you wasn't no more woke than he was, right, until this last go around. So that's what I say. Now I'm gonna close this out with Dr. King's message on a radical revolution of values. And then I'm gonna shut it down. Thank you guys for your time and attention and checking out my podcast. Appreciate you. Leave comments. Click the notify box so I can notify you when something else is published.
That if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, when machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people. The giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside. That will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed, so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth. With righteous indignation, it will look across the seas and see individual capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out with no concern for the social betterment of the countries and say this is not just. It will look at our alliance with the landed gentry of South America and say, this is not just. The Western arrogance of feeling that it has everything to teach others and nothing to learn from them is not just. A true revolution of values will lay hand on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. That is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war.
Year after year, a great many school-age children are methodically lied to regarding significant aspects of history.